Hi, I'm Mr. Simons, and in this video we're taking a look at employment contracts. In particular, what we're looking at are the rights and obligations of employers and employees. Now this is part of 910 Commerce, Employment Issues. In this video, we're going to look at a couple of things. We're going to look at employment contracts. We're continuing that information. We're also going to think about what happens when employers and employees sign employment contracts. What happens next? What are the consequences? Our focus for this video is what are the legally binding obligations for employers and employees when they sign an employment contract. So if we're thinking about, okay, what do I need to focus on from the video? It is what are the legally binding obligations when two parties sign an employment contract? Okay, key vocab. So employer, we know this, a person or business who hires employees. Employee, also done this one before, a person who works for a wage or a salary. Legally binding, here's some new stuff. Legally binding is an agreement. In our case, we're looking at a contract that is enforceable by law. So if you do not meet the terms of the contract, that the other party can go through the law to try and get what they're entitled to. Obligations. Obligations are a course of action to which a person is morally or legally bound. So in this case, in terms of obligations, what we're looking at is what are your work obligations? What are you supposed to do in this employment contract? So these are our key vocab terms, unless I'd included another one, which it turns out I did. This is the idea of good faith. Good faith comes up a lot in things like bargaining. Good faith is all about acting honestly and in cooperation with the terms of an agreement. So if I act in good faith, I act honestly and I am working to cooperate. I'm not trying to work against what's happening. Okay, let's start by looking at the rights of employees. This is the same thing as what are the obligations of employers. Let's make this even more simple. This describes what employees should expect from employers. Even more simple, what workers should expect from their bosses. So there are a number of things that workers should expect from their bosses. They should expect that their bosses will pay the correct income. So whether this is in terms of their wage or their salary. The other thing they should count on is that employers will provide a safe, healthy, and discrimination-free workplace. This is something that bosses have to do. The other thing is that bosses will provide a pay slip that shows the total pay amount and how this was calculated. So things that you might want to see on your pay slip that are required are things like how much tax did you take out? How much superannuation are you paying? Is there any loading that I'm getting with my wages? The other thing that employers cannot require you to do illegal activities. They cannot do that. If they're asking you that, well, that in itself is illegal. The other thing that employers must comply with relevant workplace laws. So let's just go back there. So then these are all the things that, these are all the things that bosses must do. Okay, if you need to pause this, go through this, make sure you got all this down. You can do that right now. We're going to keep going. Here we're looking at what are the rights of employers, what are the rights of bosses, and what are the responsibilities of employees. Put it simply, what employers should expect from their workers. Even more simply, what should bosses expect from their workers? Okay, bosses should expect that their workers will follow lawful and reasonable commands. That if your boss asks you to do something that is lawful and reasonable, you need to do that. They also expect that employees will attend work at required times and will not be late. That employees will use care and skill in carrying out work activities and will not be slack or do half-hearted jobs. That employees will act in good faith. Here we go. Remember from our vocab list that word, the words good faith. So that employees will act in good faith. So that means that they will cooperate, that they will work honestly to try and do what is required in the interests of the employer. Another thing that is required is that employees will dress appropriately for the job. So if we think about, okay, what do all these refer to? That this is all about what workers must do. So we've seen what bosses must do. Here we've got what workers must do. So our final point in this video is why should you care about your workplace rights and obligations? So we've got rights and obligations. So rights being the things that you are entitled to, and obligations are things that you must do as a worker. Good question. It's essential you know your obligations, because if you don't do what you're supposed to do, you could be disciplined or you could lose your job. Both unwelcome situations. The other thing is that it's essential you know your rights, what you are entitled to, so that you don't get exploited at work. Because you can say that my rights say that I'm not supposed to do this, or I know my rights, I'm not allowed to do this. And that will stop you from getting exploited, or stop all workers from potentially getting exploited at work. So this is why you should care about your workplace rights and obligations.